Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Doug Allman. I'm here with my friends at the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm standing here on the Antietam battlefield for the Antietam 158th anniversary, and behind me is the monument to the 15th Massachusetts. And this monument marks the approximate foremost advance of Sedgwick's division as they assaulted through the woods behind me, known as the West Woods. This regiment is going to suffer 330 casualties out of 606 men engaged, approximately thereabouts, making it the highest numerical loss of any Union regiment here at the Battle of Antietam. And to talk more about the action of Sedgwick's division here in the West Woods, I'm going to bring on Kevin Pollock, Antietam Battlefield Guide.
So where we left off last, bringing up Sedgwick's division into the West Woods, again, those three lines, Gorman's brigade in the front, Dana's brigade behind, and then Howard's brigade behind that. About 50 yards worth of spacing between each of those brigades, again, facing entirely towards the west. And when Gorman's brigade first gets to the western edge of the West Woods, approximately where we are standing, they came under fire from remnants of Stonewall Jackson's old division, the Stonewall Division, and then also some Confederate artillery that was posted on Hauser's Ridge, which is now on the other side of the bypass, Route 65 here, going around the western edge of the West Woods at Antietam. So because of that, Sedgwick's division was forced to stop at about 9 o'clock or 9:15 on the morning of the 17th. For this very large formation, again, three lines, 500 yards long. Each line is about 200 yards deep. The worst thing that could have happened to this formation was for it to stop. And that's exactly what Jackson's men and Stuart's artillery does there at Hauser's Ridge. Shortly thereafter, more chaos is going to start to grip Sedgwick's formation and Sedgwick's division. In fact, on its way into the West Woods, Sedgwick's men had initially been angling towards the southwest, towards the Dunker Church, but at some point in the middle of the field between the East Woods and the West Woods, Sedgwick or Sumner had diverted the division a little bit more towards the right, so they were moving directly due west. The left flank regiment of Gorman's brigade, for whatever reason, did not receive that order. That was the 34th New York. And so the 34th New York ended up falling in behind the 125th Pennsylvania, a brand new regiment in the Union Army. They had been in the Army for about 3 weeks. They were part of the 12th Corps. It's a whole long, convoluted story about what they were doing down there. But those two units would be some of the first that would be hit by the Confederates under Lafayette McLaws. But what happens when the 34th New York veers off towards the Dunker Church is that there's a 300-yard gap between the 15th Massachusetts and the regiment to its left, the 34th. And then also, again, remember, Sedgwick's men are facing towards the west. Lafayette McLaws' division is going to arrive at exactly the right moment, at exactly the right place, and it is going to hit Sedgwick's division from the south. And so it's going to begin to exploit that 300-yard gap. Driving back the green soldiers of the 125th Pennsylvania will be elements of Joseph Kershaw's South Carolina Brigade, William Barksdale's Mississippi Brigade. Paul Semmes's Virginians and Georgians will position themselves around the Locker Cabin, or the Alfred Poffenberger Farm, which still stands today on the other side of Route 65. And soon enough, this wave of Confederate pressure coming up from the south is going to begin caving in the left flank of Sedgwick's division. Units will start to get confused. Some of the units in Dana's brigade in the second line will start to get a little disconcerted because they're starting to receive some fire both from their left but also from Semmes's men in front. Those bullets are flying over the heads of the 15th Massachusetts, and in some cases, or at least according to the Union soldiers in the front line, in Gorman's brigade, Dana's men will start to open fire, sometimes into their very backs. 2nd Corps Commander Edwin Sumner himself is up here on the front lines, but he's going to find out from Oliver Howard's brigade, those Pennsylvanians positioned in Philly Brigade Park, that the Confederates are starting to break through. And so Edwin Sumner is going to race back towards his rear line, screaming to the Pennsylvania soldiers, trying to get them to move, to shift their front, to face this Confederate threat coming up from the south. Edwin Sumner, who we just found out, a fun source that we learned of, wore dentures on the Antietam battlefield and had to take them out in order to yell above the din of battle. Sumner still wasn't able to yell above the din of battle, and so he's waving his arms in the air trying to get these Pennsylvanians to move. Ultimately, once they finally can hear him, what Sumner is screaming to them is, "Back, boys, back, for God's sakes, get back, we are in a bad fix." And surely, some units will put up a stand, but ultimately, within about 20 minutes, Sedgwick's entire 5,400-man division is going to be driven back towards the north and east woods, and in those 15 to 20 minutes of action, will lose close to 40% of its strength here in the woods itself. As Doug mentioned, the regiment with the highest numerical loss here at Antietam, Union Regiment, is the 15th Massachusetts, whose Wounded Lion Monument stands right here behind me. So Sedgwick's division is going to be taken out of the fight. It's the first real bloody nose that the 2nd Corps has received in several months, but the fighting here in the West Woods is going to have huge repercussions for what goes on the northern end of the battlefield the rest of the day. We talked a little bit earlier about when William Franklin and the 6th Corps arrive, how Franklin wants to continue an assault into this area of the battlefield. Sumner talks him out of it. Sumner says basically, if you go in there, the 6th Corps is going to get smashed. Eventually, the two are in such a disagreement that George McClellan himself will have to come across to the west side of the creek. He meets with Franklin and Sumner in the East Woods at about 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the 17th. McClellan, apparently by most accounts, initially agrees with Franklin about driving into the West Woods a second time, but Sumner talks him out of it, and so no further Union attacks will be made here in the West Woods. And so it's sort of the ghosts of what happens to Sedgwick's division in the West Woods that plague Edwin Sumner and the Union High Command the rest of the day. And the fighting will ultimately, for the most part, move down towards the Sunken Road or Bloody Lane, and then, of course, the Burnside Bridge, and what we call the final attack south of Sharpsburg by the afternoon of the 17th.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin. One of the great stories that emerges from this, from the fighting in the West Woods, is that of Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., the future Supreme Court Justice, who is a captain in the 20th Massachusetts, and he will be part of this fleeing mass of soldiers going north across the battlefield, trying to escape the attacking Confederates, and he will be wounded in the neck, probably from an artillery shell from Nicodemus Heights, and that leads to the touching story of his father going to find him, and the supposed, in that New England style, he finds his wounded son and says, "Well, how are you, boy?" and says, "I'm fine, Dad," or something rather lackluster, not very, this very reserved New England style where they're not really going to express much emotion. But clearly, Holmes was wounded badly enough that his own father went to come find him on the battlefield, and that's a very touching story. It comes out of this fighting in the West Woods. Now, you have probably heard, as you've been watching this video, the road traffic of Route 65. This is a modern road that is bypassing the battlefield, or at least trying to bypass the battlefield. And so Tim Smith is going to talk to us a little bit about that modern road and the development of the battlefield.
So not only are we one of the more interesting aspects of the fighting of the Battle of Antietam, but also this is an interesting place to talk a little bit about the development of the Antietam battlefield. Like Gettysburg, Antietam once had a Confederate Avenue. And basically that avenue came off from the Dunker Church, came down by the West Woods and ran up, and then connected back with the historic Hagerstown Pike up near the toll gate house. And this avenue was used from the inception of the battlefield in the early 1900s until the 1960s. Basically, the story is that as vehicular traffic increased between Hagerstown and Sharpsburg, Maryland, the historic Hagerstown Pike saw a lot of this added traffic, being the main road that came into the area from the north. And the Park Service decided that it would be a good idea to make a land exchange with the state of Maryland to remove the traffic from the historic Hagerstown Pike and better preserve it. So they made a land deal. They traded away land in this area where modern Route 65 was established. And in that effort, part of Confederate Avenue was destroyed and eliminated from the battlefield in exchange for preserving the Hagerstown Turnpike, the historic part. And it did do that. There was a lot less traffic on the Hagerstown Turnpike. Unfortunately, the highway created sort of an artificial boundary between what people considered the historic battlefield and what people considered not the battlefield. And the land on the other side of modern Route 65 was not actively preserved or purchased until much more recently. And the areas where the Confederate attacks came through, that entered the West Woods, that area is on the other side of that Route 65. Now, in more recent time, different preservation groups, and Antietam's Preservation Group and American Battlefield Trust have looked at preserving land on the other side of the pike. And I think today there's more of an increased awareness of the fact that all of this area is part of the battlefield. And, the 15th Massachusetts now has become one of the lesser visited monuments on the battlefield because of the removal of this avenue, especially to pedestrian visitors such as ourselves today.
Yeah, Tim, that's really a shame because, Antietam is not as well monumented as, say, Gettysburg, and so there aren't as many monuments that are really just as artistically beautiful as this one. And you really do have to come on a hike here, from either the West Woods where we came from or from the Dunker Church and follow the trail to come out and find this monument. Now, to talk a little bit more about this monument, Brian Cheeseborough is going to come on, and maybe we can get behind the monument too as we go.
All right. Thanks, Douglas. Okay, so this is as mentioned, the 15th Massachusetts Monument. And just even if you didn't know anything, you can just gain so much just by a quick look at this monument. As mentioned, because of the road now in front of this, it doesn't get visited as much. There is a great picture, which we will include, where you can Google it. If you just Google 15th Massachusetts Monument, Antietam, 1900, on September 17th, 1900, that is what, 120 years ago today, this monument was dedicated, and it's a great shot because the veterans are all around it, and these trees aren't even there. So it's really, really, really impressive. Anyway, but what you can just get by looking at it, as mentioned, it's probably one of the most artistic, best monuments on the field. The Roaring Lion, the Wounded Lion. Here it tells the story of the fate of the 15th, and I'm just really impressed where it says within 20 minutes, 330 had fallen and 75 killed and 255 wounded. That's pretty serious casualties in a very short amount of time. Just remembering that these soldiers with their weapons could fire about 3 aimed shots in a minute, plus the artillery, of course. So anyway, there's also the 2nd Corps badge right here. And on the back, and I'm seeing this for the first time myself, are all the names of the casualties, killed and died of wounds. The wounded aren't here, but there's all the names and who these people were. Arthur Andrews, Private Arthur Andrews, Company C. Captain John Saunders, First Lieutenant. Private Melville Walker, and their dates of when they died. A number of men died on September 29th, October 1st, and so on. So it just tells a great story on its own. So when you get a chance to come to Antietam, make sure you come by and visit this. It might be a little harder to get to, but it's definitely worth the visit. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. That's excellent. And that's exactly how I was going to wrap this up. Again, we are here on Antietam, on the Antietam battlefield on the 158th anniversary, and you've been watching Antietam Live with the American Battlefield Trust. We thank you so much for watching, and really, please, if you get a chance, come out here, and when you come to the battlefield, get out of your car, walk on these trails, and walk in the footsteps of these soldiers. Come see monuments like this one from the 15th Massachusetts, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation.